My next guest, Dwight Chapin, has a brand new book out, The President's Man, that references Neil Diamond. I'll come to that. First, breaking news minutes ago, Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov appeared on Moscow television to discuss the fact that diplomatic possibilities are far from exhausted. I would propose continuing and intensifying them. Putin responding, good. That's the breaking news. Now let's put it into context of dealing with the Soviets for 50 years. Dwight Chapin, author of The President's Man, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hi, Hugh. Glad to be on.
Great to have you. You did such a superb job on This Week with George Stephanopoulos on Super Bowl Sunday. I'm not surprised The President's Man is skyrocketing up, but I want to go right to the nub, Dwight. You went with President Nixon to Moscow as a young staffer to deal with Brezhnev. You were there with him in San Clemente and Camp David when Brezhnev came to deal with him. Putin was at that time, like I was, a young man watching. What did Nixon do with Brezhnev that Joe Biden is not doing with Putin?
Well, I think President Nixon had something that I'm not sure that the current president has, and that is a base of knowledge and a vision for how he was going to handle these issues. And so strategically, Nixon was a genius, and he had multiple plans for every contingency. So I kind of wonder here if we don't need some more advanced leadership in place.
We need strategery. Now, Dwight, I'm going to get into, I've got a long conversation with you coming up. After the break, we're going to go to a second segment, then we're going to do the interview. But I want to drill down immediately on the President's Man. You went with Nixon to China in 1972. On that trip, did he give you any kind of clues as to how he thought the Chinese would evolve over the next 50 years in terms of a regime?
Actually, he did. He said that at one point, he said, you know, one of the reasons we're doing this in 50 years, we're going to be adversaries and we need to be able to talk to one another. And so I think it's amazing. I have that in the book, The President's Man. You know, he was always thinking ahead.
The President's Man is maybe the most important. I have a column in Washington Post edit right now. So I don't really care about memoirs that come out within 5 years of a presidency because nobody has the whole scope of the field. This is 50 years after the events, Dwight. So you were a very young man to walk through 4+ years of the Nixon White House.
Yes, I started working for the president actually when I was 21 years old and a student at USC, and he ran for governor against Pat Brown. And I was with him through the tough years of the 1968 campaign and on into the White House. And I really had an incredible seat witnessing what happened with Richard Nixon. And I have tried in The President's Man to really, zero in on what I saw. And you just raised a very, very important point. Most of these memoirs are written 10 minutes after somebody leaves the White House. And I'm looking back 50 years. And I hope that in my writing, that through the lens of The President's Man and looking back, I'm able to give some perspective to things.
Oh, Dwight, it's riveting. It's a fascinating book. The President's Man, every presidential historian is going to love it, but everyone who wants to understand Russia and China should read it as well. I am amazed, though, that Nixon let someone your age get close to him. Now, the key thing is, you just said student at USC. So we're going to overlook the fact that there aren't really any students at USC. We're going to talk about the culture of USC and in the late 50s. And I had dinner with Sandy Quinn on Thursday last night. We were talking about how he recruited you into it. That's how politics work. Your fraternity brother gets you in and you never get out.
That's right. That's right. Sandy was incredibly important in my life, always has been, one of my oldest friends. But it was my father in 1962 when I did not have a summer job. And I always had to have a job. That was part of our family culture. And he arranged for me to go down on Wilshire Boulevard to the Nixon for Governor headquarters. So it was Dad that did this. And I went in there and I was interviewed by a very young campaign manager, crew cut guy named Bob Haldeman, who would end up being Nixon's chief of staff. And as I say in my book, that 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 day changed my life for the better forever.
Haldeman changed the presidency forever. The Haldeman model is still the model that Ron Klain is using in the White House today.
Yes, most people do not know this. I have a long section on that. The managerial system of the Nixon White House became a model. And actually, the credit goes to President Nixon, who, the minute he got into the White House, he said to Haldeman in a meeting, he said, I want you to get General Andy Goodpasture in here. And General Goodpasture had been the staff secretary in the Eisenhower administration, and Nixon, as vice president under Eisenhower, had watched the process. And he knew that in order to cope with everything that was going on, they had to get a structure in place. So General Andy Goodpasture came in, met with Haldeman, and then Haldeman put together the meshing of what Goodpasture said with what Haldeman knew about Nixon, and that's how they ended up with the staff secretarial system that has been used all the way through. I put in the book, The President's Man, that I've talked to, I believe it was 7 other White House chiefs of staff over the years, and I always ask them about this because it's so germane to what Haldeman was all about and how Nixon operated, and actually it's germane to how a White House functions, and they all give credit to Bob Haldeman.
The President's Man is all about the promise and peril of politics. The promise that a young Dwight Chapin chased after and achieved, the peril of playing for high stakes in a divided DC. And it's the same lesson. It's the same drama. Oh, we had the Durham statement on Friday that they were spying on President Trump, Dwight. Presidents really do have enemies, and they can respond to them the right way or the wrong way. Our end got it wrong. You detail that. Would you briefly remind people why you went to jail?
I went to jail because I was I was prosecuted. Basically, the prosecutors were trying to get to President Nixon and to Bob Haldeman, and I was conveniently a young staffer in the White House, and I had been asked to find someone to play pranks on the Democrats. There was a very famous prankster that the Democrats had by the name of Dick Tuck. Dick Tuck was a terrific guy. I knew him. I'd known him for years. He had pulled tricks on us in 1962. He had pulled tricks on Nixon in 1960 when I wasn't even around. And he had also been on the scene in 1968. So when Bob Haldeman and President Nixon said, do you think you could come up with anybody that could do Dick Tuck type activities? I thought, okay, I can do that. And I went and found my good friend, Don Segretti, who had been a roommate at USC. And unfortunately, I put Don into a very awkward situation. He ended up going out and doing some, quote, what are called dirty tricks, but they were really prankster type activities. And when that got discovered through the pursuit of the people at Creep, we got caught up in that. I was taken to a grand jury. When Don Segretti went to a grand jury, he said, when Dwight hired me, he said one of the reasons he's hiring me is that I'm a lawyer. And Dwight said, you'll know what's right and what's wrong. So when Don said that to the grand jury, it made it impossible for me to be indicted for what he did, because obviously he was a lawyer and he should have known what was right and what was wrong. But what they did is, the prosecutors are very clever, and keep in mind, these prosecutors, there were around 30 Watergate prosecutors, and all of them, every single one was a Democrat, and most had worked either for President Kennedy or for Attorney General Robert Kennedy out of that Harvard maze. So it was a very
It was a
partisan
setup.
prosecution.
Dwight, the only thing that disappointed me about the ABC interview with you yesterday before the Super Bowl on this week is that they said you went to jail because of Watergate. No, you didn't. You went to
No,
jail because of Donald Segretti. And so that was a
yes,
misstatement unless we understand Watergate to be a reference to everything that was done that was political and or criminal in the course of the Nixon White House. Because you did not go to jail for Watergate.
I know it. When my father was about ready to pass away, he said he called me to the bedside and he said, "Son, will you promise me that someday you'll try to seek a pardon and get your name cleared?" It bothered him so much that I had been put into that Watergate umbrella. Um, I have elected over time not to go for a pardon.
By the
I
way, I
think that
love your explanation of that in The President's Man. I think people should read why you didn't go for a pardon. I got to go to a break here, Dwight. But before I do that, two more observations. The most surprising things I found in The President's Man. Number one, you did not meet G. Gordon Liddy until 1980. People assume like G. Gordon Liddy was living in the West Wing. No.
right.
Number two, you interviewed John Dean for his job. Now, John Dean, to quote Alsop, the columnist, bottom dwelling slug. He has avoided hard questions for 50 years. He's tried to get people to believe he's a martyr. He routinely distorts and lies when he's on TV. He should have nothing to do with the Watergate look back. And you interviewed him for the job, Dwight. I didn't know that until I read The President's Man.
Yes, I interviewed him for the job, and I said that I thought that he might fit in, but I had a caveat there. I said I think that we cannot expect him to be loyal to the president, and uh, I was
Understatement
right
of
on
the
the money there.
century. I'm coming right back with Dwight Chapin. His new book is The President's Man. It's at Amazon.com. I've tweeted out. Go find The President's Man. Go buy The President's Man. If you love politics, if you love history, if you're a young person, especially getting into politics and aspiring to get to the top, which is what Dwight Chapin did before he was 30, right? At the president's side in a substantive role at 30, dealing with the Russians, dealing with a war in Vietnam, dealing with the Chinese, dealing with the domestic political adversarial press. It's all in The President's Man. Go and get it. I'll come right back after the break with more from Dwight. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That's Neil Diamond from 1975. I'm playing it because my guest, Dwight Chapin, whose brand new book, The President's Man, available at Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere. The President's Man was featured on This Week yesterday and will be everywhere because it's really maybe the best memoir by a staffer ever written because he waited the longest. It's 48 years after the fact that Dwight Chapin has delivered The President's Man about the Nixon years. And it could not be more timely because Nixon dealt successfully with both Russia and the People's Republic of China. Unlike Joe Biden and Putin and Xi today, Dwight recounts that in The President's Man. Dwight, can I tell you that the most interesting part of this for a lot of people will be your 9 months at Lompoc and listening to Neil Diamond as you walk around the track.
I wish I had gone to Lompoc before I went to the White House. I say that and people think I'm out of my mind, but the period at Lompoc gave me a chance to really reflect and to understand another side of life by meeting the young men that were in prison and incarcerated there. It was not a prison with barbed wire and all that. It was more of a open campus, but we were all restricted. We had lost our freedom. But I spent a good part of every day walking around the track, thinking about my life, thinking about what I had done that got me there, and kind of dreaming about what I was going to do when I left. It was a very productive time for me, and one of the things I'm very proud of is that I took the opportunity there to set up a employment bureau, if you will, and as I described in The President's Man, I would take these young people that were getting ready to go out into the world, who, in many cases, did not, I mean, they were scared. They did not know how they were going to approach life. And we would write letters, and I would figure out, what they knew that might be a selling
Yeah,
point
it
and
must have
try
been
and get them a job.
amazing. It must have been
Yeah.
amazing for Big Mike, who helped you stay safe, to realize he was talking to the guy who traveled on Air Force One to Beijing and to Moscow. And it's just
That,
such a
that,
strange thing.
that's a great story. Very, very quickly, a couple of the younger guys uh, uh, harassed me. Nothing serious, but they kind of bumped me in the hallway and so forth. And a friend of mine said, "You need to go over and talk to Big Mike." And I went over to what they called his house. It was really just his room there in the barracks. And I knocked on the door, and the door opens. There's this mammoth man. I knew right there why they called him Big Mike. He was African American. He had come out of Soledad. He was a real hardcore prisoner. And I said, "Mike, my name's Dwight Chapin, and uh, it's been recommended that I talk to you." And he says, "Well, come on in." I went in, I told him my story. Turned out he loved politics. In fact, I got Pat Buchanan, my good friend, to autograph a book and send it in to him. We had great politics. But let me tell you, no one ever came near me again.
I thought of The Mayor of Kingston, the new Amazon Prime series, when I read that story in The President's Man. It's just a different world. And I want to emphasize people, The President's Man will rivet you into history, but will also give you a lot of lessons about politics, the ups and downs. And it will also summarize Richard Nixon in a way he hasn't been summarized yet. And I want people like Nixon to do that. But I also want people to understand, you probably did more good with this book by talking about Clem Stone than anything else, Dwight. W. Clement Stone is forgotten by a lot of people, but he's a remarkable character.
Yes, he was. W. Clement Stone is an American hero. This man, at one point when I was working for him after I had left the White House, the Northern Trust Bank in Chicago had him come over for a meeting, and Mr. Stone took me with him, and we had lunch downstairs in the bank's dining room, and they brought out these 3-inch thick, uh, 5-inch thick notebooks. And as you turn through them, they were all of the pledges that he had made to girls and boys clubs, drug rehabilitation programs, and so forth. And the bankers said to Mr. Stone, "Mr. Stone, with all these commitments, you're going to run out of money." And he said, "That's exactly what I plan on doing.
That's the
I
plan.
want I want to give it away. I don't want somebody else giving away my money. I'm going to do it."
W. Clement Stone. There's so much in The President's Man. I'm going to continue talking to Dwight on the other side because at this moment, Russia has not started a war. Nixon walked into the White House in the middle of a war, 500,000 American troops in a combat zone. We'll talk with Dwight Chapin about that. That will be available at the interview with Hugh Hewitt later today. But go and get The President's Man right now. Frank Luntz's rule: if you don't say the title 7 times, The President's Man, The President's Man, The President's Man, go get it at Amazon.com. Give it to anyone you know who loves politics and who is thinking about a career in it, especially people under the age of 30, which is what Dwight Chapin was when he went to the White House and then he went to Lompoc. The President's Man. I'll be back tomorrow, America. Hopefully Russia will not have invaded. I'll bring you the breaking news always first. Interviews like this one with Dwight Chapin. Stay tuned. Back now with Dwight Chapin for the interview, the longer segment. Dwight, I think the greatest senior or junior year term paper I've ever heard of in high school is your daughter Kimberly's project because she produced real history. In fact, would you tell people about the project and who responded to her, why she did it? It's the best part of The President's Man.
Well, my daughter Kimberly, a very bright woman who is now considerably older, obviously, she had a term project, and she decided to do it on Watergate. And she wrote letters. She wrote letters to President Nixon, to former Attorney General John Mitchell, to John Ehrlichman, and to Bob Haldeman, and all four men responded to her. And we have put various excerpts of these letters into the book with her permission. I mean, she owns the letters, but there are various insights that come through. I mean, you can find some of the character of the men themselves. Nixon, I would say, was the one that was most kind of aloof in his answers, whereas John Mitchell was very direct, a handwritten letter saying that he felt that the American public did not understand what Watergate was all about, which is true. I think John Mitchell hits a very important chord here. In fact, most people have just accepted the idea that this was a scandal and that Richard Nixon was somehow evil, and his reputation has been tarnished by this, whereas Richard Nixon was a victim. Not that he didn't make mistakes that he apologized to the nation for on David Frost. I'm not obviously he felt that he had a need to apologize, and he did, but he was trapped by his counsel. He in my book, in the appendix of my book, makes it clear beyond any doubt that this man was not told the truth. The President of the United States was not told the truth from the June break-in through till March of 1973, 9 months. I used the example the other day, Hugh, of President Johnson. I was absolutely astounded when I learned of Robert McNamara's book about his years working for Johnson. And in Robert McNamara's book, he talks about the fact that when he was defense secretary, they gave bad information, incorrect information on the Vietnam War to the President of the United States. In other words, the Secretary of Defense knew the information that he was given to Johnson was not truthful. Dean's information to Nixon was not truthful. Dean knew the truth. He knew who was involved. He could have at day one said, folks, here's what's going on. And he did not do that.
No, he didn't. Dwight, what's so impressive about The President's Man, your memoir, and Jeff Shepard's book, The Watergate Conspiracy, is that 48 years after the resignation arrived two new books, which will command the attention of any serious historian. I'm not sure that they'll change the 50th anniversary narrative in Hollywood. Your conversation with Ron Bass is very interesting at the end. But history's going to have to deal with the fact that John Dean was the desk man for the Watergate cover-up. He should never be on TV. It's sort of like when I see Tim Naphtali, the third director of the Nixon Library, on TV, pretending to be a presidential historian as opposed to a partisan attack dog. It's like Dean showing up. You're very gracious. You're not a bitter man at all. But it must cause some bile in your throat to see him feted as an ethics expert.
Yes, I call that a joke in the book. I mean, for him to be appearing at legal conferences as an ethics expert is beyond belief. We did find a document that was a report done in 1974 by the FBI. It was an internal investigation trying to determine what the FBI had done wrong, and it was written to the director. And in that document, which is in the back of The President's Man, it's in the appendix, the FBI calls John Dean the master manipulator of Watergate.
And he sent you a telegram on the day you were released from prison. That told me more about John Dean than anything else. I mean, the guy sent you to prison, and he sends you a telegram. The guy is really, as I think it was Stuart also, quote, bottom-dwelling slug. And he skips out on any confrontation with anyone who knows anything about Watergate. Let me go back to Nixon. I got to know Nixon in 1978, knew him for 15 years after the fall. So I got to see everything in the rearview mirror. You lived it forward. at the speed of sound. I mean, from 1962 to 1974 must be a blur in your mind, Dwight Chapin.
Well, it's a blur, but it's a blur. I think that I've anchored myself in terms of the president's man into to dissecting. I had lots of journal entries that I had kept a journal. I had a tremendous number of letters back and forth with Bob Haldeman, which helped to my recall. And then the archives there in California are filled with documents. So it was a treasure trove of material to help refresh my memory on these various stories and the happenings.
I love the summary line on page 348. This ridiculous, completely unnecessary burglary had changed American history. I just think that was very succinct. I don't know how long it took for you to come up with that concise rendering of Watergate. This ridiculous, completely unnecessary burglary had changed American history.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. But the important thing, Hugh, is that Richard Nixon knew nothing about that. He had no idea that that was going to happen. And it was the mishandling of it by lower level aides who had the opportunity to tell the truth and didn't step up to it. And
Now,
I am in my interview with George Stephanopoulos with Rick Klein on that show over on Sunday. It was part that didn't make the cut, but I was asked how I felt about young people coming into government, and I think it's critical that young people come into government and and get into the process, but they have got to have the intestinal fortitude to tell their superiors the truth, and we have a situation where that did not happen.
now, Dwight Chapin, there is a very useful White House staff chart at the beginning. And I made check marks next to every single person with whom I've had extended conversations. So even though I'm young, I got to meet and know 32 of the people on that staff chart. But again, from the perspective of it all being behind me, who disappointed you the most?
I was disappointed the most from my research with a good friend of mine from USC by the name of Gordon Strawn. Gordon was an aide to Bob Haldeman, and he has refused for the last 50 years to be interviewed, talked to, or anything. And I finally figured out why, and that is because when John Dean on the right immediately after the break-in, when he talked to Gordon Liddy, he said, "Is there anybody else at the White House that knew?" And Gordon Liddy said, "Yes, Gordon Strawn." And John Dean lied before the Senate, said there was no one else. Gordon Strawn himself covered up the fact that he had knowledge that there was going to be a break-in. And knowing Gordon as I do, and he's an incredibly bright lawyer now, but he was a very young man then. And he had, in my opinion, an obligation to Bob Haldeman, his superior, when he first saw Bob after the break-in. He said he should have said, "Sir, there's something I have to share with you, and you're not going to like it. And here's what happened." Had he done that, history would have been changed. Nixon
Oh,
would never have
it's such
resigned.
a stupid thing that happened. Such a stupid thing. All right, let me
Hugh,
go to
can
the
I
two
say?
big things. Go ahead, Dwight.
Yeah, you talk about the front of the book. I want to mention that in the back of the book, we have an appendix of tapes, and that these tapes, the transcripts, we've worked very hard on, and we give a resource, a viewer of the book, a reader of the book, can go to the appendix, bring up on their own computer the actual tape that transcript covers, and listen to the tape as they're reading the transcript. It's a marvelous thing to actually hear inside the Oval Office John Dean talking to Richard Nixon.
It's at page 429 to 431, and you really can't beat it. You really cannot beat this book, The President's Man. Dwight, I want to cover two serious subjects before we go. First of all, you're a civilian, you arrive in the White House, Americans are being wounded or killed at 1,000 a week. As a civilian, did that hit you that you and the president and the whole team had to stop the death of Americans?
Well, it sure hit me. It hit me in a couple of different ways. One way, I felt incredibly inferior to the men that worked in the White House, particularly the military aides, who our friend Jack Brennan,
Yep.
who men these incredible people who had been over there and experienced and fought in Vietnam, and I had not been in the service, and I kind of felt lesser than. I mean, I respected all of these people that came into the White House that had their military credentials were, to me, very, very special people. Um,
You know, I've
so
referred, by the way, Dwight, to many years to Jack Brennan level loyalty.
yes,
It's a
yes,
good level. It cannot be surpassed. It is, of course, he's never touched by Watergate. He's a military aide, but he sticks with the old man until he gets back to New York. Jack
that's
Brennan
right.
level loyalty is rare.
It's rare. Jack read my book and sent me an email congratulating me and saying that it was one of the best summaries of Richard Nixon that he had ever encountered, and that was like to me a stamp of approval.
Yeah, no better person other than the daughters to actually pass that judgment than Jack Brennan. But back to the Vietnam issue. Did it weigh on you every day going to work that there's a war going on?
Yes, it did. It was hanging over the whole period in the White House, and I get we had to deal with all the demonstrators out on the 500,000 at one point out there on their moratorium days. Uh, it was on our mind constantly, and there was a poignant moment that it happened two or three times, but the first time the buzzer went off and the president had a buzzer on his desk. When he pushed it, I was to go into the office, and I went in, and he said, "Here, give these to Rose." And there was this tear coming down the side of his face. And what he had handed me were letters to the parents of young soldiers who had lost their life in Vietnam. And this thing was incredibly personal to him.
It's a
And one of
powerful
the thing
moment in the book.
one of the things that upset me most was when some historians or others have implied that the president and Henry Kissinger wanted to have the war continue into the 1972 period because it would be useful politically. That to me is absolutely outrageous and uh, does not give credit to Richard Nixon, who was a Quaker, who did not believe in war. He wanted to end that war, and he everything in his heart and soul was directed toward getting that accomplished. And you said it earlier. When he came, there were 510,000 troops in Vietnam when he went into office. And when he left, I think it was down somewhere eight to 10,000. And as you know, the war ended very soon thereafter. I mean, had he not left office, it would have all been over really soon.
Americans were not dying when he left office. Let me close by talking about China, Dwight, because the 50th anniversary of the trip is, of course, right now, and that's why the President's Man is so timely. When you arrived in China 50 years ago, were you startled by how primitive it was?
It was unbelievable. I look at the pictures now and I can't believe it. It was all this muted grays and uh, nothing colorful. In fact, that was one of the reasons when Nixon went to China, we put Mrs. Nixon in a red coat. I mean, to draw the contrast for the television audiences back home. But yes, it was very primitive. There were signs up, running dogs of capitalism and all of this propaganda stuff that was aimed at the United States. Uh, it was an incredible experience to go over there right at the outset of this opening and see how primitive it really was.
So, Dwight, coming forward 50 years, and let's just think out 50 years. You and I will both be in heaven. We won't have to worry about this, but our grandkids will. If the same pathways are followed, if the same trend lines continue that have emerged over the 50 years since the opening to China, what will the world look like in 2072?
Well, it depends on who's fixing the trend lines. It depends upon who this nation turns to in order to come up with strategically with what it is and how we're going to run ourselves. I think what happened here is that the commercial aspect of everything, which we all are free enterprise people, I believe we believe in that, but that outran that commercial stuff got way ahead of national interest. And if I had to give a real salute, I would give it to President Trump for waking us up. I mean, part of everything he started doing with China brought about or started a process of what is really going on here, and now it's kind of like, okay, I think we're waking up, and what we need to do is to have the men and women of commerce continue to do their commerce, but to be working closely with our national leaders to put that commerce behind national interest. And in terms of determining the national interest, we need some real good thinkers that help us figure out what that strategy is going to be.
We need a generation of Nixons, people who actually study grand strategy, who come up, who are tutored by Dwight Eisenhower, among other people, and who learn and then confront this challenge. Dwight, I think you're helping to do that with The President's Man. You've certainly impacted the history of Richard Nixon and the history of his presidency with The President's Man. Congratulations. It's going to be a bestseller. Great hit on ABC this week, yesterday. Continued success this week of your book launch, Dwight.
Thank you, Hugh. And I hope people go out to the bookstores and Amazon and get The President's Man. Thank you.
That's it. 7 times. The President's Man, The President's Man. Dwight Chapin, thank you.